And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's fashion, Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And now, here's Ted.
Well, thank you very much, Becky, and thank you one and all for tuning in to another episode of the Ted Wallachin Podcast. My special guest this week was recently inducted, and this is a great honor, into the Allan Waters Broadcast Hall of Fame. There are only 51 inductees, including himself. It is an honor attributed to his 60-plus years in radio as a broadcaster, programmer, and international consultant in more than 40 countries. Here in Canada, along with other major accomplishments, he, along with his colleague and partner, John Parikhal, launched Toronto's iconic Q107 radio in 1977. Dave Charles, good to see you. Well, first of all, congratulations, David, on the Allan Waters Broadcast Hall of Fame induction. It's quite an honor indeed. And it looks good on you. How are you?
I'm really good. I mean, 62 years in radio and I'm still walking and talking. So what can I tell you? But no, it's that is a thrill because I worked for Mr. Waters back in 71, 72, 73 and music director there with J. Robert Wood and assistant.
That was at Chum AM.
That was Chum AM, yep. And
Yeah.
Chum FM was really starting to, get into its big numbers with its alternative format. And David Marsden was there and some great people. Brian Master, Benji Karsh, and who else?
John Donaby.
John Donaby was there.
Peter Griffin.
Pete and Gates. Whoa.
Yeah.
What a show. What a show.
Yeah. Now, Chum AM at that time, I mean, that was the hot number in town.
Well, it was the Drake format, but Bob had a different twist on it because what he got is some really good personalities like, John Rhodey, Jay Nelson was there. I worked with Jay a lot. And they still had a talk show. They had John Gilbert doing the talk show in the morning for an hour. But the rest of it was just, Shotgun Tom Rivers, one of the best ever. And,
yeah, he was.
He was so funny and quick. He had Cousin Raul's Radio Ranch in the middle of a top 40 show and said, "What the hell is that?" And he said, "Watch me," right? And he made up this soap opera in the middle of a top 40 radio show and carried the characters and the whole thing. But he was completely bonkers and nuts, but beautiful man. Beautiful man.
Yeah, he was. I mean, the word "unique" is bandied about way too often, and it's overused. But he was, because while everyone was talking up the vocals and doing the traditional shtick, all of a sudden Rivers just appeared with characters and just started doing weird stuff, and people were thinking like, "What is that?" As you say, what is that? And
do you remember a song by Las Indos Tabajaras called? What was it called? It was the long 1 minute and 23-second walk up, and he did a minute and 23-second talk up to that song, Las Indos Tabajaras. And it was just like, it was a work of art. Doing the talk ups and hitting the post was also a work of art. So those were the days.
Those were the days. Let us go back to the day that you first started in radio. You're from Hamilton. You're a Hammer boy. But Belleville is you're at the beginning of your career, correct?
Yeah, well, just to back up a couple years, I started doing, after my hockey career tanked with an injury, I started doing high school sports at Hill Park High for the last 2 years, grade 11 and 12, with Bill Stirrup. So I would go out and do, hockey penalty announcements, and I would do a PA and I would do dances for Bill Stirrup. Bill was the master of that. So one of the games I had to do that Bill couldn't make was a junior A hockey game at the Hamilton Forum. I'll never forget it. And Bobby Orr was playing for the Oshawa Generals. He gets a penalty. So Bobby Orr, 2 minutes for high sticking time, and the whole thing. And that was the thrill. And then later on, he had his phenomenal NHL career. But he did a lot of PA work. And Bill would let me use the studios after night to make voice demos. And I'd send them out to radio stations in Brantford and, North Bay. And finally, Belleville called and said, "Look, we have a job for you. It's not much. It's news, $50 a week. And, you can do many different things down here. We'd like to talk to you." So 1963, I got that job and it just took off.
And how old are you at this time?
I was 18.
Wow.
Yeah. And it just blossomed from there. So news wasn't my thing. After butchering many newscasts, they said, "No, you're not good enough for news. But we have a top 40 show. This guy's leaving and going back to Toronto." And I said, sure, I'll give it. That's what I wanted to do. So I got into
Yeah.
a show called At the Top, which is a drive show, and from there it all took off. And I started doing gigs at the arena, and I had 40% CanCon at that time because my gig was to play as much new music as I could. All the bands that were coming through from Toronto to play in Belleville, I played on the air. So I figured, wow, what a great opportunity. So yeah, I just kept rocking that town, and it was amazing. I mean, the town was just like ready for it. It was sitting there between Kingston and Toronto, and it was ready to rock.
Yeah. And how long did you last in Belleville before you moved on?
I was in Belleville because I was so bad for 4 years, uh, and and then I got it because it was just I just didn't come easy to me, but I had to really work at it. I got a call from the late Jack Hill at CKOC, and Nevin Grant was there, and CKOC being my hometown radio station. You got to be kidding. And you're doing afternoon drive. Hal Weaver is leaving us and going to 1050 Chum. I said, whoa. So I get down there all excited and get on the afternoon drive show. And all the people I went to school with who said, you should have worked in the steel company, hear me on radio, my mom
Yeah.
and dad, my sister. And I figured, what a rush. What a rush.
Yeah.
And of course, it just, I don't know what it was. I switched into another gear in my brain and it all started to come together. But my competition was 1050 Chum. You could hear them loud and clear in Hamilton. So we had to do something different, better, crazier. And so I just turned on the personality switch and made up shit as I went along, and we had a lot of fun.
Nevin Grant is there's that's an icon. Unfortunately
Yep.
we lost Nevin a number of years ago, but he was so well respected and so well loved. I never saw the guy. I worked there for a few years part time. I never saw the guy get mad ever.
I have never ever seen him lose his temper with
And in
anybody.
radio, that is is an oddity to say the least, because most people in radio, as you
Yeah.
well know, are crazy.
Well, anybody who knows me knows that I'm very intense, right? So Nevin said, "Look, we can't have you up here with the real people. You drive them nuts. So we're going to put you in the basement. There's a little office down there with spider webs and old discs, but it'll have a typewriter, and you can listen to the radio down there and do your show prep, and nobody will bug you." And I said, "Great, give me that." So I used to be down there for 3 hours before my show, banging out show prep, and that day was grabbing newspapers and flyers and anything I could, while I'm smelling wine being made in the neighborhood because it was an Italian district. And I did my show prep down there. But rather than Nevin and I get into a stoush about some silly little thing, he just banished me to the basement.
Yeah.
It was great.
And
I
then
loved it.
how long was CKOC's life?
I was CKOC almost 5 years before J. Robert Wood called it chum,
Yeah.
and he said, "Look," he said, "I got a music job for you and some on air work." I said, "Sure, let's talk about it." So yeah, that was my big leap into Toronto. And J. Robert Wood is a killer program. He's like the ninja.
Yeah.
So everything was like marine like precision. I mean, the talent was amazing. So my job was to work with Jay Nelson on the morning show and John Gilbert on the talk show, picking topics, to do the music, to do the chart, the chum chart, which was famous, and also do an overnight or weekend show or fill in for anybody who went away on vacation. So
So
I did that.
what was the big draw for you? Was it being on air, or was it the music?
Really, on air, I thought I was really average. Like I had my moments, but it just really, the wearing and tearing of doing that day in and day out didn't appeal to me. What I really loved was and I learned this from Nevin, was putting the music together, doing the music research. I love marketing and promotion of the station, so going out to events and stuff,
Hmm.
and getting street things happening. So that, and directing talent. I mean, sitting down with Jay Nelson, and Jay would be in the, mentally, he'd be in a dark place after a show. Oh, it was a terrible show. Jay, let's talk about what you did that was really, really good. Oh, you think so? Insecure talent. So that became my thing. I just really like to work with talent and direct them and give them the courage to go on the air and do what they did. And I had some great times and learned some incredible things. People like Scott Carpenter taught me a lot of things. Trying to manage Tom Rivers, was amazing. And so I really found that behind the scenes is where my expertise came into be. But on air, not so much. I mean, I figured, I love to do commercials as well for some reason. I like to do spots, and I had my share. And I love to write. I like to write columns and stuff. So I used to write, a lot of the chum memos and stuff. And yeah, I enjoyed that. So I'm a behind the scenes geek.
And while you were at working at Chum, were you not doing consulting at the same time?
Well, I would do consulting at Bob's will. He would say, "Look, can you help somebody in Peterborough or somebody out west?" So really, the other job I had at Chum was talent scout. I mean, I would get tapes from everywhere. He said, "Go through them, pick the best ones out, or drive down to Nashville and listen to somebody." Like these incredible requests about finding the best talent for Chum. So yeah, I would hear tons of audition tapes and some of them not so good in average, but some were quite good. So getting the talent roster together right at Chum was part of my job as well.
You and I first met because I got to know Terry Steele. He was somewhat of a mentor of mine
Terry Bear.
when I was at
Yep.
Seneca College, and he used to go over my air checks and give me tips and etc. And he said, "I'm going to pass on your tape to Dave Charles at the station at Chum because he's working with a station out in Montreal called Seafox out in the West Island."
Yeah, yeah.
And lo and behold, I got a job working at Seafox through you.
Hmm. Yep.
I stayed there just for a while. I wasn't really that comfortable living in Montreal, to be totally honest.
The West
Lo-
Island. Hey, you on the
yeah,
West Island?
the
Yeah.
West Island, yeah, and came back and worked part time at CKOC. And one night I was doing the all night show, and over the old ticker tape came the news that Mr. Allan Slate had been awarded a license for a new FM station in Toronto. Thus,
Hmm.
Q107 was born, and
Hmm.
you hired me to do weekends. I came to you, I pitched an idea called the Comedy Bowl, which was a
Right.
1 hour show.
Yep.
Um, it was based on Phil McKellar's All That Jazz, which ran on CKFM.
Oh, what a great show that was. I
Yeah,
love.
and I thought, well,
Oh,
you know what? He did all jazz music, and I thought I'm going to do all comedy cuts because I had this collection of comedy albums. I was doing stand-up comedy at the time,
yeah, yeah. You
and
were.
I pitched the idea to you. And back then, the CRTC demanded that FM stations have a certain amount of spoken word content,
Hmm.
and you gave me that job, and you said, well, we need somebody to do the mornings, Saturday and Sunday mornings. We'll give you that as well, and I did.
That's good. I mean, I had access to people like John Candy,
Yeah,
John Stockard, and a guy by the name of what was his name? Very, very famous comic, Jim Carrey. Do you know Jim Carrey?
yeah, yeah. For real.
Yeah. Anyway, he was doing shtick at Yuck Yucks. I went over to see him one night, and he was doing impersonations. Right, that was his shtick then. And I said, "How would you like to do some time on the radio? I've got a show a week." And so he came over, and he didn't care much for the format, right? So, but anyway, had him do a couple shifts, and after that, he didn't show up, so I fired him. And then you love this story. Years later, when I became uh, chairman of the Junos, Karis, I had to go to Jim, hat in hand, and say, "Would you like to MC the Juno show?" And he said, "We'll talk to my manager." Right. So his manager said, "Yeah, that'll be $80,000, and our budget was 30." And I said, "No, can't do, Jim." But anyway,
Mhm.
that's a little sidebar for Jim. But he went on to do Pet Detective and all the great crazy stuff he did, Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah.
And I had my 15 minutes of fame with him. Um, Not the greatest of guys to deal with, but I can't deny his talent.
Kyoto 7, for a lot of people, it was a breath of fresh air because Chum FM at that time was not doing the same thing. I mean, there was CHFI was playing Candlelight and Wine, and Chum FM was expanded on the format of AM. There were more intense or more depth to it. But then Q came along. But the original idea for Q was not what Q turned out to be. Alan Slate wanted it to be like a CHFI.
Well, here's what he did. He said, I'll give you the backstory on that. When we got the license, Alan calls. Well, I guess I should congratulate you and John, Dave. That was you guys obviously figured out the CRTC. But let me tell you, you're going to cost me a ton of money because this rock format is not going to work in Toronto. My friends tell me that a really classy radio station would work, and I want to propose that the call letters be CILQ, Silk. And I said, "You're fucking kidding." He said, "No." And I said, "Well, I can work with Q, but Silk, forget that. Anyway, if it wasn't for Tony Viner, the general manager at the time, who
Yeah.
went to Alan and said, Alan, this station is going to do extremely well. Don't lose the grip of what we're trying to do here. We're already making inroads on Chum FM and starting to eat their numbers for lunch, especially the middle of the demographic, which is where the money is. Please leave it as it was." And he's, "Well, if you think so, right?" But anyway, the son of a bitch And I say that with great respect for Allan Slate because he is what he is. But he wanted to sell the radio station after 6 months to Selkirk Broadcasting,
Mm.
Kenny Baker. And I said, when we found out about this, John Parikhal and I personally felt betrayed.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, this is over. Unfortunately, our dream long term is not going to happen. Gary Slate was already in the building. We figured blood's thicker than water. So we said, we're getting tons of requests by radio groups to go work for them and do what we did at Q. And so we set up joint communications, smoked a big spliff, and there it was. Just, there's no way, there was no loyalty, and that's what really galled me is the fact that, we worked. Not only did I do CFGM and the other three radio stations, CHOK Sarnia and CFOX Montreal, but there was no loyalty to what we had given him. So he gets this license and later on brokers and sells it for $82 million, which he used to then buy Standard Broadcasting. So I think we did okay for Allan Slate. So I have, I can say mission accomplished. But for us personally, it was a slap in the head. And so we went on to say we'd never work for people like that. We're going to work for people who are philosophically aligned with what we can do. We aligned ourselves with Lee Abrams in Atlanta and the Superstars radio format. And we just took off, got calls from Europe and Australia. You guys work for us. Ended up working for our Australian clients in 1987. And we had a incredible relationship. They were very much into what we were doing. And, you got to work with people who are going to work with you. If they don't like you, they should declare that right away for whatever and people hiding behind politics and family and everything else. That should be illegal because you can hurt a lot of people's careers by doing that.
And what would differentiate back then or even today? What's the difference between the sound of radio in Australia and the sound of radio in Canada?
One word: personality. The people on air in Australia are larger than life. You feel like they're right in the community you're broadcasting from. They're just more vibrant. I mean, I'm not gosh golly, hey, hey, hey. They're just more in tune with things that people are talking about that day, whether it's a sports story or somebody needs to have a help and assistance. They're just really tuned into their communities in a much stronger way. And I just love their attitude. They had a can-do attitude, and I love that. No worries, mate. She'll be right, is what they say in Australia.
You have a story you can share with us about the crocodile hunter?
Yeah, you're talking about Steve Irwin,
Yeah,
the crocodile hunter?
yeah.
Yeah, he came we consulted a radio station called Mix and Gold FM on the Sunshine Coast, which is very close to Australia Zoo, which is in the Glasshouse Mountains near Beerwah. And he had this, what he would do with all the money he would make from his, television shows and things, he would put back into buying tracts of land so developers couldn't come in and steal the ore or the minerals and stuff. And he just had this incredible, I wouldn't call it a zoo. It was like a free game. It was like a game reserve, basically.
Yeah.
And all the animals, tigers, lions, elephants, rhinos would all run free, in within the confines of this. And it was like the real habitat. He created the first ever wildlife hospital. So any injured koala or tiger or whatever would be repaired at this hospital. And he was just an amazing guy. And I saw him wrestle. Wrestle a 12-meter croc. You know,
Wow.
this thing was rolling him around and around in this swamp, and he actually knew what to do to get it to calm down. And then they put the rope around its mouth, and he'd haul it on shore. This is one guy doing this, not a team of guys, and he'd haul it on shore. There you go, hey, Cracky. By Cracky. It was just, he was larger than life, strong guy, but smart. Like he would get in with pythons and other things that would kill you, but he had this mojo happening between animals, and he was able to communicate with them and be with them. But to see him wrestle this croc just stunned me, the way he did it and the skill he had in doing it. And he had this sort of crocatorium at the zoo where there'd be crocs swimming around, and he'd do the wrestling of the crocs and show them up, and they'd come and try to bite his ass, and he'd move them away. And it was just such a great entertaining show to see You see, the crocodile is one of the most feared creatures in Australia, along
Yeah.
with many other poisonous things. But the croc was famous for killing people. In a place called like a billabong is like a quiet pond. Family goes to have a nice picnic by the billabong. Next thing you know, a 12-meter croc is coming out
Yeah.
and takes the lunch and a few other people away. But he was larger than life. But he walked the talk. Steve Irwin did. He would put his money back into the zoo and the preservation of wildlife, and he lived very modestly with his wife Terry and his boy Robert and Bindi on the property in a 3-bedroom house, very modest. And he would do nothing but promote wildlife conservation. And he was just magic. I'm proud to be a wildlife warrior because of Steve Irwin, and because it's just one of those. I mean, to see those animals and do what they do and how beautiful they are, I just loved it, and I'm a big fan of what he did.
Ted Wallachin returns in a moment.
Fashion to go for men on the go. Hey, it's Ted Wallachin for Tom's Place. If you need to refresh your wardrobe this spring, visit Tom's Place and check out the new spring and summer fashions. At Tom's Place, even the new arrivals are on sale. Spring colors, new patterns, new designs, designer suits sold elsewhere for as much as $5.99. Tom is selling for $179 to $279. Selected sports jackets, regularly up to $750, are 50% off. Is a wedding on your schedule? Because we got lots of great suits. Or perhaps you need a matching vest, shoes, or accessories. If so, just ask. Looking for a tuxedo? Starting at only $5.99. Upstairs, designer suits for $100 off. Buy 2, get $125 off. Buy 3, get $150 off. Say hello to spring suit fashions today at Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin Street in Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you.
I'm being completely honest now, okay? Homelessness makes me uncomfortable. But then I think, at least it's not sleeping on the sidewalk with everything I own uncomfortable.
Don't let homelessness assumptions get in the way of homelessness solutions. Go to CanadaCanDoIt.ca. Help the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness.
Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
Let me ask you about some of the other countries that you worked in radio, and how their style of radio differs from ours, and how they're, because to me it's like, I would think that, I mean, communication is, if you can reach out and grab people's attention and show that you understand where they live and you care about where they live and you're part of where they live, that's the whole key.
Well, let's talk about South Africa. That's a good example. We got a contract through the Australian government, a division called Austrade, and we represented the media division. So we went in there with a couple other consultants to work with SABC, which is like the CBC or BBC.
Yeah.
And they had when we went there, there's 14 languages to deal with in all of South Africa, a country of 68 million people. 11 of those 14 languages are official languages. So when we went to a place called Mofokeng is in the northwest part of South Africa. It's up there near Kruger National Park. So we're out there in this town called Mofokeng, and I went to the general manager and I met him, and he's a very nice man. And he said, "Look," I said, "what's the number one issue with you?" And he said, "People are killing each other in the streets for work, casual part-time work. We just can't get enough jobs." And he said, I don't know what to do about it. It's a real issue for us. The chief of police came to us, and they're causing riots in front of different factories and stuff. And I said, so let's go to the boardroom and talk to your other people here, and let's see if we can work out something. So over a period of a week, we came up with a thing called Peace Jobs. And what Peace Jobs was an announcement at 9 o'clock, at noon, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, and where we get all the factories and all the companies that were hiring people to promote the jobs available. So everybody would be glued into Peace Jobs to find out what was available. And instead of people lining up and stabbing each other in line and doing nasty things, Peace Jobs, you could see the spike in the ratings where Peace Jobs would come on. It tripled the audience ratings, even ahead of news. It was the most important feature. And so after about 3 months of this, they realized that this was a really important feature. So they started to do job fairs on the weekends, and they started to educate people up to working in specific jobs in the market. It's a mining area, in a rural area. So they got together after this whole thing went down and was very successful and said, do you have anything else? And I said, no, this is the number one issue. So that's it. That's all I got for now. But that's an example of going into a country like South Africa,
Hmm.
which was, gone through the apartheid system, and all these blacks were marginalized, and a lot of them left and went offshore. And to see this happening through radio, that really excited me. That really excited me.
So that harkens back to what I was saying is that if you can get your finger in the pulse of what matters to the people who are out there holding the radio in their hands and manage to wrap your head around it, then people will accept you.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
herein lies the problem today, and I'm taking a long way around this. Herein lies the problem today, where you've got these corporations who buy these radio stations, and they decide, okay, we've got stations in 7 markets. We've got one guy in this market. He's going to do a radio show. It's going to be broadcast in all those markets. Connection zero. And you
Yep.
wonder why people are saying, "Well, I don't care." The generation growing up going, "I don't care about radio. I can't relate to
No,
radio."
you hit on a very important point, and one that I'm trying to resolve right now with some companies. Um, it's the CEOs and the bean counters that have taken over from radio, and they say to the board of directors, "We can make you much more efficient. We can get." They got into multi-skilling. That was the first project. So instead of doing one job, you're doing two and sometimes three jobs. And now you're going to network out your best talent, but they have no, as you said, no regional and local connection, and that's the thing that's missing right now. All of the people I'm working with as clients, I'm saying local first. Do you remember Cliff Dumas used to work in
Yep.
Hamilton at Cham Radio?
Yep.
Cliff and his partners own a radio group called Local First Media. Now they have stations in Texarkana, Texas. They have in all through Alaska, in Wisconsin and Michigan. They got 43 radio stations, and the premise is local first, and that is everything first. And they're starting to really, really do well. And we're talking to other groups in Canada saying this is the way. My FM in Canada is doing that.
Right.
Vista is doing that out west. Durham Broadcasting here locally is doing that. And if you go local, you will win the day, and you'll win the ratings, and you win the revenue. It's simple, but people don't believe you
Now,
until you
now,
show them.
now the radio, the way these, pardon me, the way we hear it, the way we see it now, that is going to change. I mean, there may not ever, eventually, may not be an AM band, for example, but the content is always going to be the content. So whether it's done through streaming, whether it's done through a podcast, whether it's done through magic in the air, it's all going to be it's all about the content. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from your car, whether it's coming from a speaker by or series spitting it out to you or whatever.
Yep, that's true. I mean, content is, I mean, I hate to sound cliche-ish, but content still is king. I mean, the content you create for your audience, and your audience needs to hear that content, and it has to be local in some sense, and it has to be useful and relevant to their lives. If it's not, then they're going to dismiss you, and they will go to TikTok for entertainment, or they go somewhere else. But local first. I mean, that's why Cliff Dumas is going to do very, very well, and he's a proud Canadian working in America. He's based in Juneau, Alaska. So you're absolutely right. And when you look at all the radio companies around that are in trouble right now, I don't want to mention any by name because
Yeah.
it's well known. But the fact of the matter is, if they don't change their strategies and get away from this amalgamation of talent and utilizing it and spreading it out and networking it out, they're not going to be successful. It's just not going to work.
So for a young kid growing up right now, thinking I'd like a career in radio, I'm still fascinated by the concept of sitting behind a microphone, talking to people, enchanting people, and and grabbing their attention and informing, entertaining them at the same time.
They're not going to do that. They're going to do what you're doing right now, which is podcasting. I went to a podcast conference that was the warm up to Radio Days North America, just recently held in Toronto. And podcasting is like alive. All the young people are going into podcasting because they can do their shows in 30 minutes to an hour, and and they're starting to get revenue models together. They're starting to sponsor it. The whole thing was in the initial days of podcasting was, can we monetize this and make a living? Because a lot of people were doing it as a hobby, but those who are seriously into podcasting and doing what you're doing on the air right now and have specific skills and talents and subject specialties, they're going to do very well. And podcasting is starting to eclipse radio in some cases. Like we all know about time shifting. I mean, when I watch TV at night, I've got all the shows accessed, recorded, ready to go for me,
Yeah,
on my own network. So I program the Radio Kajini Dave Charles network at night. And radio is very much the same. If they want to hear your podcast, whenever it's available, they're gonna time shift it into their world, and that's going to be it. The key things in radio are morning and afternoon drive, which is still has a majority of listeners for surveillance information. You want to get the latest news, the
yeah,
traffic, all the situations, sport, things that are happening overnight, weather. That still is good territory for radio if you do it right.
yeah.
But if you do it wrong, you're going to lose that as well. So a lot of people are going to go to, like I've got so many sources on the internet right now that I can use for local information. And that's going to continue as long as radio doesn't do what it's supposed to do and meant to do, which is be local and be relevant. It's going to lose.
Yeah. So again, going back to what I was going to ask you is, and you've raised some fabulous points here. Is how do you inspire somebody who has uh, a desire to be a broadcaster, whatever that word means nowadays?
Mhm.
Broadcaster, podcaster, whatever, communicator. Do you tell them, listen, just because radio is going through some rocky times doesn't mean that you can't still have a life behind a microphone because of podcasting and
Yeah,
other venues?
I think they should, in the early days, like if I had a chance to start my career over again and radio was available, I would certainly, because still has mass connections, and if you are good, they will find out about you. The word of mouth will get around that, hey, have you heard Ted Wallishin at night? Very funny show. I mean, check it out. It's word of mouth that really, if you can get word of mouth on what you do on the air, whether it's a podcast or a broadcast, and then people notice you, you get noticed, and then the bigger stations will call and offer you something. But you've got to make some noise somewhere, somehow. I mean, that on stage is stand up. If you have a really good set, say, whoa, that was really good. And then the next night you go and you bomb because different crowd, different mood, different attitude. On radio, you don't get the direct feedback that you do from the stage. I mean,
No.
you've got to do it. It's pretty much in a vacuum, and you've got to kind of imagine the response. You may get a phone call every now and then or an email, but that's doubtful. So it's a one-way street. You don't get the kind of feedback you do when you're a stand-up comic. You can look in the audience and say, "Wow, there it is."
I mean,
I'm good.
the thing about podcasting is good news and bad news. And the good news is anybody can start a podcast if you want. It's a
Yeah.
couple $100 to buy a microphone, buy a mixer, and plug it into your computer. And Bob's your uncle. There you go. You got your own podcast. That's the
Mhm.
good news. The bad news is there's nobody over your shoulder editing you, telling you, no program director saying, "Hey, listen, you're slurring your words. You're not pronouncing this properly. You're not introducing your guests. You're not giving her enough background. Whatever it is that you're not doing, you're not doing. Nobody's telling you. So how does a young kid who wants to be a communicator getting into a podcast is easy? How do they get to a point where they're getting better and better and better without some sort of a mentor?
Well, that's a really tough one. I mean, if you're there trying to direct yourself, I say that good luck with that. That's almost impossible.
Yeah.
You need someone that's going to be your coach, someone you trust that's going to give you some good advice. When I work with some podcasters that I have in the past, I say, learn how to ask the question many different ways. Number one, and number two, listen to the response of your guest on air, because if you don't listen to the response, you will eclipse what that person is saying because you want to be heard. You want to get your next question in quickly. I said, that's not going to work for the audience. They want to hear what your guest has to say, and you've got to be able to frame them in such a way that they're the star standing on your stage. You make sure that they're heard properly, you know. And also, you've got to start to network out and create, like just like you do on YouTube. You know, the new bands coming up, they create a cult following, and it's word of mouth. And you got to create a good word of mouth campaign that, yeah, check this out, this is really good. And there's ways of doing that on the internet and through social media. Social media is still very powerful, and that's the way to cross promote this thing.
Yeah.
How many followers do you have on your Facebook or Instagram? You.
Facebook, whatever the maximum is, I can't accept any more, they tell me, apparently.
Okay, so that's good. So
and
that's
of
good.
course, I know absolutely none of them.
No, but I mean, if you wanted to get the word out that you're going to be talking to Gary Slate on the podcast, and people are interested in that, you could use that social media to say, hey, by the way, my guest on Thursday is going to be Gary Slate.
Yeah.
This guy, you know, owns
which is what I do.
Yeah. And you know, and you got to, you know, tell a friend. You know, you got to use the tell a friend concept as well. That if you like what you hear, tell a friend. You know, and keep cross promoting it. And eventually, when something is hot, it'll get out there. Do you remember the early days of MTV?
Yeah.
How did you respond to MTV as a broadcaster?
Probably in awe and fascination, and asking myself, okay, next. Now
Did
what?
video kill the radio star for you?
No.
No, it never did. It never will.
No.
You know, never will. Do you remember the character Max Headroom on MTV?
Yeah, of course.
Crazy, funny stuff. All artificial, you know, but very clever, very, very clever. Just enough to, you know, Max Headroom was a character within the character of MTV. You know, and that's what you are if you want to be. You know, you could be that voice, that character. I mean, you look at Jim Henson and the Muppets. He made a livelihood out of creating those zany characters.
Yeah, true enough.
Yeah.
David, I want to thank you very much. Two things I want to thank you for. First of all, for being here. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And secondly, for giving me the most unique note and instruction that I ever received from anybody in the 50 years that I've been working in radio. One day when I was at Q107, remember we all had these little lockers, and memos would be passed through by management into the lockers. And I opened up my locker one day, and there was just a little note in there, and it said, "You're fired because you're an asshole."
Was it true? What did you do?
I can't remember.
What did you do?
But I remember looking at it.
You have been a very naughty boy. I
remember looking at it, and I was gobsmacked. I thought, what is he serious? Like at first I thought, I'm fired.
Was I serious?
And then I thought, no, he can't fire me. Nobody fires you that way. That's no way to fire anybody.
You mean I didn't have the stones to face you, look you in the eye, and say you're an asshole, you're fired? I didn't.
Yeah,
I do that.
I don't know what it was, but to this day, boy, it sticks in my mind. But I got the point. The point was, okay, whatever I was doing at that time was not a good thing. So don't do it. I guess whatever it was, and I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, and I had a person say to me, I tried to fire, say, "Who made you the judge and jury? Who the fuck made you the judge and jury? Who You can't fire me. I'll tell you when you can be fired."
Yeah,
you know, like it was just like, wow, you have so much referent power. Sometimes you get, you know, but when somebody pisses you off, you got to make a point.
And you made your point, and I think it made me a better broadcaster. At least.
Why are you talking to me then? Why are you wasting time on me?
I was short a guest this week. Again, congratulations on the Allan Waters Broadcast Hall of Fame induction. Only 51 people in that hallowed hall, and you're one of them, and you deserve to be. Man, I thank you for your time. All the best, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Good luck to you, and good luck with the podcast. I'm honored to be on it. Thank you.
That'll do it for another edition of the Ted Wallachin podcast. They're all available for you, by the way. Simply go to www.tedwallachin. That's WOLOSHYN. I've had all kinds of different spellings, so I'm giving you the proper one. WOLOSHYN, tedwallachin.ca. Leave us your comments, your thoughts, your questions, your suggestions, and check out any of the past episodes that we've recorded in almost 3 years. In the meantime, while you're online, don't forget to fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. Meantime, have a great week.
The Ted Wallachin podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. The Ted Wallachin podcast is produced by me, Becky Coles. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more information on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwallachin.ca.